So let's start here. The Surgeon General is basically saying that next week in this country, because of the coronavirus, will be a Pearl Harbor 9/11 event. Let's hear him.
It's going to be our Pearl Harbor moment. It's going to be our 9/11 moment. It's going to be the hardest moment for many Americans in their entire lives.
Next week, they are expecting the coronavirus to effectively continue to just get worse. Now, I've been telling you on this channel that the ineffective response of Donald Trump is largely to blame for the death toll that we are having in this country, in the United States. It just so happens that the coronavirus wasn't necessarily paying attention to the fact that we are in the middle of a political process. Between the two things, the coronavirus is real. The political process is more of a conceptual thing for us to choose who is going to take power. You can make an honest argument, is it really us that's choosing this process if the things that we want are not necessarily the things that the political system are giving? Nevertheless, political system, in this particular system, there's a process. The process is still going on in the middle of a pandemic. Now, the death toll in the United States, which is at this point the epicenter of this virus, 362,995 cases, 26,322 new cases, 10,735 deaths, 1,119 new deaths. Whatever number that you see there, also keep in mind that we don't have the test kits to know, meaning the death toll is higher and the numbers of total cases is undoubtedly, completely, rationally higher. It's a pandemic. A pandemic is what a pandemic is. We in the society have to be able to accommodate the fact that this is a real thing that's invading and intruding upon our political, economic, cultural, social process, and it's just something you wait out. It's not the end of the world. It's a couple of months. That said, depending on how the people behave in this society, meaning whether they take the social distancing seriously, whether they remain at work, whether they don't go out, engage in these social functions, the orgy that took place in Spain, that's probably a bad idea. The birthday party that they were having in California, probably a bad idea. If the public adheres to the conditions of social distancing and pay attention to the CDC, the scientists and the rational actors that is in the process to say, keep your distance, let this pass. We can come together after. The governor of Wisconsin, like I said, we're in the middle of a political process. Tony Evers. Governor Tony Evers, Democrat, tried to get the election postponed, and he tried to go through the Republican legislature to do it. The Republican legislature says, nope, we're going to have this election. We're going to have this election. Evers took the provocative act today that says this election is not taking place. We are moving and postponing this election to June. Let's hear a statement on this, because this is amazing. This is a person who recognizes that this is a dire crisis. And in knowing that, as governor, how on earth can you tell your public to come together in a large gathering where those people can effectively get other people infected as they go out into the population? They may have mothers, cousins, sisters, brothers, all with the notion that they could be killed just by going to vote, which means you're going to have a large number of people that just don't vote. They're not going to put themselves on the line in order to go and vote in that process, meaning not only are you suppressing the vote, you are intentionally allowing human beings to put themselves in a situation where they can contract an illness that has already infected hundreds of thousands of people in this country, including the Prime Minister of the UK, who is now apparently in intensive care. You are needlessly putting those people at risk for something that is not even real. That date is contrived. That date can move if it needs to be moved if something else is intruding upon that date that takes higher priority. That's called rational actions in the context of a society dealing with a pandemic that is emboldened when huge numbers of people are together. You don't have to have symptoms to be contagious. So this notion that, well, I don't have any symptoms, that doesn't necessarily mean anything in the immediate, especially if you're in a large gathering of people. The governor comes out, says this.
More cases, we expect more deaths, we expect more tragedies. With that in mind, I cannot in good conscience allow any types of gathering that would further the spread of this disease and to put more lives at risk. I have been advised by public health experts at the Department of Health Services that despite the heroic efforts and good work of our local election officials, poll workers, and National Guard troops, there's not a sufficiently safe way to administer in-person voting tomorrow.
all ballots.
What did you expect him to do? Honestly, what did you expect him to do? He's the governor of that state. If the governor of that state goes through a process that allows a potential for people to get ill, and those people end up getting other people ill, and his hospital system is slammed because they decided to have an election where all of these people, little petri dishes, go and vote. And again, I still make the point that there's also a certain degree of suppression in that vote for the number of people who's just not going to come because they don't want to take the chance of getting ill. Rational actions. That is immediately being taken to the court system. The Republicans are contesting this, basically saying, we are immediately challenging the executive order in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. The clerks of the state should stand ready to proceed with this election. The governor executive order is clearly an unconstitutional overreach, wrote Speaker Robin Voss and leader Scott Fitzgerald. As we speak, the election is off. Whether or not the Supreme Court hears this today, and if I'm not mistaken, they're going to hear this today, the election may be back on. One of the people who has sided with the Republicans, with the irrational, with the people who are okay with people going to risk their lives in order to vote, who are willing for those people to die or other people to die in order to go and place their vote. Who is that person? That person is, of course, one, Joe Biden. Joe Biden was asked whether or not those people should go to vote, whether or not this should be postponed. Now, Sanders has said, yes, this should be postponed. Clearly, this is a pandemic. Clearly, we're getting slammed by this. Clearly, the numbers are higher than what they're saying they are. So why create a situation that is against the advice of your doctors, of your surgeon generals, of your scientists, of your epidemiologists, of your disease specialists? Why would you take a political opinion that is against that advice across the board? Why? Sanders says, don't worry about it. Now, you can cynically argue that Sanders wants this election to be postponed and, go longer. It gives Joe Biden longer time to collapse. That may be true, but it is also absolutely and infinitely true that it is in the middle of a pandemic where we are the epicenter, and a contest like this, where you're putting all of these people in one spot, is a recipe for utter and complete disaster. Both can exist at the same time because both are true. Joe Biden just wants those people to get him over the finish line as soon as possible, even if it means them losing their life. When I say he doesn't care about you, case in point.
It's a case where we cannot let this. We've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy take second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health. It's a case where we cannot let this.
Do you know what that muddled man is trying to say in this particular conversation? I can barely understand what Joe Biden is saying here. I think what he's saying is, we've never had an election postponed. We've never had an election postponed. We got to keep democracy going. As if postponing an election is somehow the end of democracy itself. I hate to tell Joe Biden this, but several of the elections have been postponed. 15 states have postponed their primaries because of the coronavirus. Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Hawaii, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, West Virginia, Wyoming, Puerto Rico. That's not the end of democracy. They just postponed an election. An election is just a conceptual thing that we do on a particular day. It's not given by God. It doesn't have to appear on a very specific day. It can be moved if there's something of a higher priority that takes the conversation. Here's another one. After attacks on 9/11, the primary was rescheduled to September 25th with runoff, if necessary, on October 11th. So what do you say? What do you know? You have a crisis, and in the midst of that crisis, the public decides to move the election. It's not the end of democracy. It's not something that's never taken place before. It has taken place before. September 25th, October 11th. Let's just be very clear. What Joe Biden wants is for people to get him over the finish line as soon as possible, because he has been utterly embarrassing himself over the past 2 weeks. 1 week, he was nowhere to be found. They were basically hiding him to help him recharge. And the second week after that, when he finally did come out, he made one stumbling, bumbling, ridiculous, low energy, who gives a shit press conference after the next, realizing that he didn't necessarily know how technology worked and was stressing about figuring out how to do a live stream from wherever he was. Joe Biden has been an utter and entire embarrassment. And now he has this expectation that the left is going to vote for him and put him in office. Look, many of the elements of the left is still in that mindset of, you have nowhere else to go. I suggest if you ever really want to get anything real accomplished, you don't back people like that. Joe Biden is literally advocating for people to put their lives on the line in order to go and get him over the finish line as soon as humanly possible. He's at 1,200 delegates. He has to get to 1990. He looks bad. We're in the middle of a pandemic. He has no presence in the context of contesting or being opposition in this particular race. At some point, is it possible that if the election goes on longer, Joe Biden, the public, may start to notice? Well, here's the catch. Whether the answer is true or false, the fact that the answer or the question exists at all means that if your name is Joe Biden, you need to wrap this up as soon as possible, because there is a chance, there's some level of probability where the public may catch wise that this guy's not up to the task. You need to seal the deal before that ever takes place. If the public comes to that conclusion afterwards, okay, fine. You deal with that at the time. You're in the general election. They'll give you a pass on a lot of stuff, especially if you're the guy who gets Trump out of office. But the catch is, you got to win the primary first. And if they keep delaying these elections, that means this primary goes on longer and longer and longer, giving you more and more of a chance to put your foot in your mouth in a way that the public does not accept. Joe Biden is so weak that his wife at this point has started to carry the burden.
I want to welcome all of you to a family town hall on COVID-19 with Vice President Biden, Dr. Joe Biden. Now it is my honor to turn it over to Dr. Joe Biden and Vice President Biden, who will get us started.
Thanks, Michelle. And I love your sweater with the flag on it. That looks great. Yeah. And I think that's really what we need to get through these trying times is joy and kindness. And I can see that your children are very kind to one another. I think that's one of the things Joe and I try to instill in our own children. And so anyway, I really compliment you as parents because I know how tough it is. And so I just wanted to, and if you get some questions, they can call Stan and Pop. So it doesn't feel so formal because that's what we're used to. So anyway, thanks for joining us. And, we're happy to see all of you.
Am I supposed to say something now?
Yeah, you can say something.
Well, hi, everybody.
And want to welcome all.
This is so sad. This is so sad. I remember when Jill came out. I've said before, Jill Biden doesn't love her husband. She has that man out there day after day after day looking absurd and ridiculous. And if it wasn't for media that was, meaning if media dealt with Joe Biden in the way that media dealt with Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden would be eaten alive. It's true and it's fair to say that Sanders, media was hostile towards Sanders. The Democratic Party was hostile towards Sanders. The wealth of the nation was hostile towards Sanders. All of that is true. The way that they give Joe Biden a light touch, despite the fact that the man has, the literacy of a child at this point. He can barely get his words out, barely get his thoughts out, somewhat incoherent, easily scrambles the most basic of sentences. And when he has to speak extemporaneously, it's almost like he can't do it. This is the guy who the Democratic Party is putting up to hold back and beat Trump. I would make the argument that Biden was more important in the context of beating Sanders, which was the point of the race. Whether or not Biden loses, this is kind of like the Matrix, where the computer has made the point that there are some levels of existence that we are willing to accept. Well, the Democratic Party is the same. If Sanders wins, Sanders takes the party for a generation. If Biden loses, the same creatures are there. Meaning, they are willing to take their luck with Biden in the general, with the idea that if he loses, that's better than Sanders potentially winning. It's shame. It's sad. I still put that lefties need to grow up and have a spine and stop with the cowardice and stop looking at elections as these one-to-one items, putting all your faith and hopes in one glorious outcome. Lefties need to start looking at themselves as something fundamentally different than the Democratic Party if you are ever going to get your policy ideas passed, it's not going to be through cowardice. It's not going to be through this notion that the Democratic Party at some point is going to give me a breadcrumb and is going to change. And they're never going to do that. That's not what the party is. It's a mouthpiece. It uses the notion of identity in order to ignore issues of economics. The question for the left is, when are you going to get to the point where you realize if you really want to get something accomplished, you need to work in tandem, lefties across the nation, with very specific policy goals that you are not willing to bite without those credibly being attended to. If the Democratic Party loses, they loses. The whole point of this is not just one election. The point of this is over the course of time. Over the course of the last 40, 50 years, your party has slid further and further and further to the right. Bill Clinton goes after Glass-Steagall. Bill Clinton destroys welfare. Bill Clinton the communications or deregulates communications. Bill Clinton does all of these horrible things. He passes NAFTA, and the left stays with him. You have nowhere else to go. The moment that you get stuck into that particular ideology and that particular mindset, you're cowed. What you want doesn't necessarily matter. You could be marginalized, you could be talked about, doesn't matter. Because your reasoning for being in the political space is not an affirmative vote, it's a vote to keep Republicans out. Meaning you allow Democrats to do whatever they want. This takes place for 40 years, and this gets set as the normal way of thinking. So when you decide to not vote for that hack, they browbeat you as if you're a member of their party. How dare you not vote for the hack that we put up? And you accept that and bitch about that, as if you're some child that's being coddled or scolded. That is as dumb and as stupid as a Democrat saying a Republican didn't vote for my hack. You are not part of that party, and you need to start attending yourself as such. No, I don't necessarily want Trump to win, but I don't want Joe Biden to win either. I don't have a dog in this particular hunt. These two parties are functioning almost in tandem with this kind of scam that is running on the American public. The left, at some point, grows a spine, and it organizes, and it sets very specific policy objectives that it wants to accomplish. If the Democratic Party burns to the ground because it no longer has the left to kick around, that's on them. We have the objectives that we want to accomplish. Our objectives are demonstrably better in regards to policy. We saw that with Sanders, despite the fact that Sanders lost. And yes, you have an autopsy on Sanders, but from the standpoint of a party with certain political ideas and political objectives that works to the material benefit of the American population, that's where you start. It's not entirely in the political space, even though ultimately your ultimate aim is to take political power. It's almost like a reverse of the Tea Party or something. What I would love if Sanders turns his particular political apparatus into a movement. Now, what I mean by that is all of the names that he has on that list, all of the people all across the United States that were willing to give money and funding and all of those things, that is a recipe to be marshaled for the sake of creating something fundamentally different in the political space, where all of these people all across the United States have the ability to talk, to argue, to bitch about what they want to see politically, and to almost function as if a party under itself, like a substructure under whatever this political space is, and make decisions on what is willing to accept versus not in mass group form. Meaning, you are not a Democrat. At that point, you're something else. And the fact that you have all of these other people backing you with the notion that there are general policy ideas that you all agree on in lockstep, and that you are not willing to accept anything less, that is where your political power starts. And that's where you start to gain the items that you want. Over the last 40 years, you have been scammed. Listen to Larsa. I'll end it on this. I play this clip 1,000 times a day if I had the opportunity.
If you want to pull the party, the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking, you must show them that you're capable of not voting for them.
Because the way the Democratic Party is run now for quite a number of presidential cycles is they pick a nominee in a kind of half-assed process that doesn't really represent much of anybody, and then they tell everybody to just shut up. Don't bring up anything that will complicate life for your nominee. You know he's not for you on this. Why badger him? He's not going to be for you for reasons that you don't understand but are good reasons. Shut up. Turn off your brains.
If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party because the left had nowhere to go.
Lefties have this vision of the world of people being fair, people being nice, people being honorable. If I scratch your back, you'll scratch my back. If I support you and your particular policies, then at some point you'll throw me a bone and you'll start doing my... It doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Politics isn't about... Those people have every incentive in the world to not follow your policies. Bernie Sanders ran this race and won the argument on policies, and the Democratic Party lined up entirely against Sanders. Not just lined up against Sanders, also lined up against his supporters. Oh, they're racist, they're sexist, they're bros. Completely invisibilizing all of the people of color, all of the Hispanics, all of these other people that were part of this political process, including many women. I mean, I guess I'm making the point that that party decided to literally attack Sanders and then attack his supporters in order to use that attack on his supporters to back Sanders. And now the party is going to turn around and say, hey, you guys got to support us. Where's your spine? Where's your spine? I guess that's what I'm asking. How low, like, what level of servitude and just degradation are you willing to accept? That's like being spit on and then being told to go and do something else. Why are you accepting that? And accepting it for like 40, 50 years? Your pathway, you've been told something that's not true. And I understand that you have this big feeling for the world and everything else, but accept something for the moment. Your big feeling for the world and all of the things that need to get done, these big, expansive projects that you care about that need to get done, they will never get done through the way that you're trying to do it. The way that you get those things done is stop looking at politics as an individual political process of 4 years and look at it over the course of time. The movement that I am talking about, the organization of energy that I'm talking about, is not something that's evolved within the course of one term. That's something that grows and expands over the course of the nation, where you're pulling large numbers of people into this political process because you are effectively under the political process, making decisions in mass. The African American vote goes what? 90% to Democrats. Imagine for the moment if that vote didn't do that. If it wasn't lumped in all in one era. The fact that these guys complain that, oh, they take us for granted, Yes, because you vote in tune to 90%. The entire point that you vote at 90% means they don't have to give you anything. They have other people that need to cater to. They don't have to cater to you. And the same thing applies to lefties. The same thing has applied to lefties for 40 years. You guys have been on with this notion of supporting people, but who they're not. And in that process, losing all notion of accountability. Meaning, in the moments where you need somebody who is agile and efficient, intellectual, imaginative, in that position, in the Democratic Party, because we've gone for so long without any accountability, you have stooges. Beyond that point, the population has been so dead in regards to their expectations and imaginations that when you finally get somebody like Sanders, they believe he can't win. Why? Because the left for all of these years has fallen behind the Democratic Party and has outright forsaken its responsibility to attend to the needs of the nation. All of these big fucking priorities, the gravity of these things should weigh on you in regards to the way you do politics. I'm not saying that taking this particular disposition won't allow Trump to win. It might. What I am saying is that whether Trump wins or not, what is your objective? And does your objective go beyond this notion of Donald Trump? And how do you accomplish that objective? By putting every random hack Democrat in the election. If you want your objectives accomplished, it starts with an organization of the people in this country that have similar or same ideas. I don't give a shit what their party is. I don't give a shit what they consider themselves politically. You come up with specific objectives that you want to accomplish, and you use that as a tip of the spear in your political space, and you don't deviate from that at all. Either they accept your model of politics or they not. Consider yourself a different party that lumps on depending upon what the person is going for. If you get 20% of the nation that takes that particular policy and that number starts to grow, you have a movement. My thing with Sanders is that because of the way he's run his campaign with so many volunteers and so many people across the nation, it is easier for him to institute something like that using his email list as a nerve center and using the money and the donations that people have given to him as a way to kind of form the beginning of that particular system. I don't think he's going to do that. But what I want him to, especially if the goal is to get things done politically into the future that goes beyond his particular political campaign, because the worst thing in the world would be for his campaign to fizzle out and all of these people all across the United States that he was able to web together blink out. That would be the worst. I'll leave it here. Let's see. We have people here. Duteous Priest. Bernie, not me, us. Also, Bernie, Joe's my friend, us. Joe's not our friend, Bernie. Quit making this election about you. Great job, Jamal. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to end this here because I want to get a few more videos in. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.